Hi Otto, how are you?
Th- Thank you, Danielle. I'm very well. I look forward to speaking with you and answering questions, whatever.
Okay, yes, I wish next time we can do it in Spanish as you are interested in our language and you used to learn languages easily.
Well, yes, I'm still I'm still learning it, but I need practice, and that's the issue.
Okay. Well, then, Otto, we will focus our interview around executive coaching and executive consulting, as you do coaching as well as any type of assessment and consulting relating to
Yes,
mental and
yes.
ethics. And so I would like to know, can you tell us about an typical issue that typically arises when you do executive coaching or executive consulting?
First of all, muchas gracias, Daniel, por su invitación. I wish I spoke more Spanish. You asked me about a typical issue. When I coach,
Sorry, just a moment, Otto. They tell me that maybe you can put your camera on.
yes, I thought it was on. Oh yeah, here it is. Um, so when I coach and I listen to my clients, what I notice is that what's going on is much more than uh, behavior, that there is a frame of reference that they follow that I'm trying to understand. And so to pick a particular example, if somebody says to me, I really don't get along with my boss very well, then for that person speaking, what he or she calls the boss is an outside physical person, whereas I hear some more than that. I hear that it is also an inner voice in the coachee, that he or she makes herself an image of the boss, and actually the boss is a voice in her. And so that's what I call social emotional listening. And what that means is that I have to find out from what level of meaning making, to speak with Keegan, the person is speaking. And I can make very precise assessments of that through an interview, as you know. But in coaching, I have schooled myself and students like you to hear what's going on. So my question is, from what stage of development is the person saying she cannot get along with her boss? And I think that is a huge contribution to coaching, because in listening that way and responding accordingly, and I will talk about how I would respond, we are broadening the effectiveness or deepening the effectiveness of coaching. So what might I say? I would just say initially, tell me more about your boss. And when she then would do that, I would have more material and information to find out how she makes meaning of her relationship to her boss, of her relationship to herself, of her relationship with the organization she works for. And that helps me open up the conversation with the coachee in a much deeper way. That's what I would say, Danielle.
Yeah, I think you have put it very well, that you look for a frame of reference and in
Yes.
two ways. First, in a social emotional way, and also in a cognitive way. You have deepened very much in separating them, not because they are separated, because they need to be analyzed separately. So
Yes, thank you. I have not spoken about the cognitive yet, but yes, indeed, the cognitive dimension of the frame of reference is another way into the coachee. And by cognitive, I mean and not what the coachee is saying, but the structure of her thinking. And this is not immediately easy to understand, but by structure of thinking, I mean what thought forms is the coachee using. For instance, she could be picturing her work in a more static way, which I call context, or she could be using a process thought form by which she would have a more dynamic understanding of the situation she is in and the boss is in and the organization is in. So, if I add this cognitive dimension, then the coaching conversation gets even deeper.
Mm-hmm. Well, in fact, sometimes you cannot find the context thought forms or the context way of thinking, and you can create it, as I have learned from you, which is very interesting how you open the mind of the person, letting them go into the context or process or systemic thought forms or way of thinking.
That is very true. The coach becomes a provocateur, an agent who provokes the client into new ways of thinking, both socially, emotionally, and cognitively. And if we had the means and the time, we could measure actually the development of the coachee over, let's say, a year, both in social, emotional, and cognitive terms. But yes, so we have two sets of tools to deepen the coaching conversation. And that is not just, for me, something that empowers the coach, but it also mightily, I think, empowers the coachee, because she learns to think about herself in a different way from what she has done before, wouldn't you say?
Mm-hmm. Well, fantastic. It's very rich, all the things you are telling us. So if we go to the meaning making part of your view of the coachee, I think this is a very interesting concept, how you look for how the person is making meaning of the situation. You ask him or her to tell more because you want to know about the generator of the meaning that the person is feeling or thinking.
Yes, we are assuming in a way that there is a little machine in the coachee that I call the meaning generator. And this comes across through the speech. In language, we can detect how this meaning generator works. And the same is true for the cognitive generator. And by that, I mean that while this is unconscious initially to the coachee, once she gets to know her own meaning-making generator more, what is now unconscious will become conscious. And I think all coaching is concerned with exactly that, to make conscious, to make the person aware of what he or she is not seeing or hearing yet.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and speaking about practical terms, as when you do executive coaching, you're looking for solving some kind of situations.
Yes.
What is the importance of the stage that the person is in for solving problems, for creating new solutions? What is the importance?
Yes, thank you.
Helping to that.
Yes. Well, I would think, Danielle, that depending on a person's developmental level of meaning making, in order to have a problem, or if you have a problem and are looking for a solution, then you are part of the problem, because the coachee is part of the problem because she is creating the problem in the way that her meaning making allows. So if she is at level 3, Keegan, her problem will be different from when she is at level 4. And that's where I would begin. I wouldn't look right away at the solution. I would ask, well, in what sense is that a problem for you? So I have to understand why, on account of the coachee's meaning making, she is having this problem which she is creating. And I have to work at making her aware that if she looked at the problem from a higher level of meaning making, it would be a different problem and the solution would also be different.
Yeah, so it may be a question of that the person can get to a different frame of reference, but
Yes,
maybe he is not still getting to there with, and you can help him or her about that.
exactly. So for me, coaching is about not changing behavior, but changing frame of reference, and the behavior will follow. So the idea is that behavior is secondary in the sense that it is determined by the frame of reference, both cognitive and social emotional. And since most of coaching today is still behavioral, this whole other dimension of meaning making, of making sense cognitively, is not seen. And so I think coachees have to understand a little more about the relationship between behavior and meaning and frame of reference. And I think you would agree with that.
Yes, absolutely. We
Yeah.
can learn a lot from you about that. And well, getting to cognitive side, as you have now spoke about, what is so the role of dialectical thinking? What is the role that dialectical thinking can play for creating new solutions? Can you remember any example of how to create new solutions from formal logic thinking to get into dialectical thinking?
Yes, I think we can stay with the same example I gave you,
Yeah.
where somebody is saying, I cannot get along with my boss. Because this is both a social emotional and a cognitive statement. And the cognitive statement has to do with how the relationship to the boss is framed. So if you speak of a person and you say, "Oh, I just can't get along with the boss. He does not empower me. He does not really support me, and maybe he doesn't even believe in my competences." Then this is a very static view of the boss, regardless of who he or she is, in the sense that we are painting a picture of an agent other than the coachee, who is now described as being in some static relationship with a coachee, and it's a static, unmoving relationship. So, for instance, now if I want to bring some thinking about process into that, I could ask, well, I'm sorry to hear that you don't get along with your boss, but tell me a little bit more about how this relationship with your boss has developed over time. Let's say in the last 6 months, how do you think you may have contributed to this relationship not working? And so then I would find out more about not only what happened behaviorally, but how the coachee is thinking about this relationship in terms of time. I can also go to relationship thought forms, and that might be a little more difficult to understand for the coachee, because each of these 4 classes of thought forms are not just tools, but they have to do with going to a higher level of thinking oneself as one uses these thought forms. But let me just think. So, for instance, one relationship thought form would be limits of separation. And so I would probably try to bring across to the client, which I have already indicated in what I said before, that there is a point, there's only, I would say, the relationship between the coachee and the boss, the two cannot be separated beyond a certain point. So they hang together. They are interdependent, because I think the coachee will understand that whatever she does will have an effect on the boss, and the boss will act in a particular way. So we have this interdependence between the coachee and the boss. And she has to understand that, I think, to bring more light into this relationship. That would be an example that might be simple enough to indicate what I mean here. The interdependence between the coachee and the boss, because she is creating this relationship to the boss. And this interrelationship of which I'm speaking is part of her doing. So she has to understand that she can't just draw a line between her and the boss is over there, but the boss is not only in her, he is deeply related to her, and she may not understand that initially. Actually, now I cannot hear you.
Sorry, I was muted. Sorry.
Okay.
If we can, I would like to give you another question. Can you?
Yes.
Okay, it's about what you have said about relationships and the emotional side, the relationship thought forms and class of thought form of dialectics,
Yeah.
and the social emotional side. So, how can be the step for a person to be aware of the internalized other that is inside yourself? And
yes.
how to get to the real person that you have the question like this with. So you have a boss inside yourself, and you have a boss outside yourself, and it seems that the relationship thought forms helps you to get beyond this problem of having a boss inside that you're not aware that you can influence on the boss outside.
Yes, that is quite right, Daniel, because the relationship thought forms, if we consider them in a simple way, all have to do with intrinsic relationships between people and things, not just people and things and people and things and so forth. So when we become ready cognitively to think in terms of relationship, a very important issue that becomes clear to us is what I call common ground. And common ground means that I and you, however different we are in our opinions and our way of life, we share something. We share, for instance, a culture, like the Spanish culture or any other culture, or a language. And so dialectical thinking really has to do with thinking separation and sameness at the same time. So I'm the same with you, I'm identical with you as a human being, as speaking a particular language. That's what we share, that's our common ground. And it is on the basis of this sharing that we are different. And so if we didn't share anything like the language or an opinion or a feeling, we also couldn't be different. And that's what it takes to understand more about relationships. Now, let me relate that to the internalization process. That between Keegan stage 3 and 4, we internalize the social world, such as another person called the boss. And we are initially at stage 3 where we are other dependent, as Keegan says. We are not aware of that. So we are not only other dependent in the sense that we define ourselves by others' expectations, that is more of a behavioral outcome, but we are other dependent in that we are not aware of what we are internalizing. And this, the extent to which one can show a person how this internalization works I think depends on their social emotional level and their cognitive level. And in coaching, it also would take time to do that. But that, I would say, since most of our clients are between Kegan stage 3 and 4, is the most important, or one of the most important coaching tasks of the coach, to make the coachee aware of this internalization. And by internalization, I simply mean that the coachee initially has no control over or is not aware of the fact that the boss is an inner voice. And so the coachee, must herself mentally grow to the point, with the aid of the coach, to see that and to become aware of her own power and her own self-authorizing resources. That's what I would say.
Well, fantastic. Otto, it's a crystal clear explanation of how coaching can help people, how people can influence or can get aware
Yes.
of the capacity of influence, of influencing through thinking in relationship terms, in relationship thinking terms, in this class of dialectical forms, and how you use also social emotional side for getting to there. So it's a clear combination of these four elements.
Yeah, I would say, the trick is you have to learn to think dialectically when you think social emotionally. So the two are really fused. Mm-hmm. Yeah, as you just said.
Yeah, and that's why it is important to separate them. Just to not get just into one of them.
But yes, because if you cannot separate them, you also cannot link them.
That's it. Mm-hmm. Right. So Otto, if you want to say anything before we end this magnificent interview.
Well, it's a great pleasure, first of all, to speak with you, whom I have worked with for quite some time and who clearly has absorbed essential knowledge from this teaching. And also, I'm happy to and I want to thank you again for your invitation. I'm very excited by working with coachees from other countries, other languages, and I have some familiarity now with Spanish-speaking coaches from my work in Chile also. And so, yes, I look forward to reaching many more coachees who want to learn more about frame of reference, or especially, coaches, because I think this is a training issue. We need to develop, and you probably have begun to develop a train the trainer program where we help coaches, first of all, to understand. The one thing I would like to add before I give this back to you is this, that if you look at the coaching literature, what I see is that a strict distinction is made between coaches and coachees. And from a social emotional and dialectical point of view, that distinction makes no sense, because the coach is equally under development as the coachee is. And so they share this common ground, that they are both under development, that they are developing adults. And so I think this social emotional and dialectical coaching is initially much more about the coach than the coachee, because the coach can help others only to the extent that he or she is herself developed. And if the coach is not developed, then whatever he or she does might not be very effective. And this is not very different from psychotherapy or any other service. I think a helper is always effective to the extent that he or she is herself developed. And it has to do with skills only secondarily. And I wish that the coach education would shift more attention in educating coaches to this need for coaches to be themselves more highly developed. And so put the focus on development, adult development of coaches rather than skills and such things. That would be my hope.
Very well. Thank you very much, and that's our hope also to help people and coaches specifically to get to their maximum developmental.
Yes, yes.
And
If there are questions, I would be glad to stay on and answer them.
okay, okay. Then, if there is any question, please type us. Type anything you would like to ask to Otto Laske. Or if you want to go into the conversation, we can get the phone to you. So anyone?
Have
I see
courage.
many people there, but I don't know
Courage,
if they are
courage.
because they don't want to ask questions. Maybe they are not coaches.
Yeah, well, you would be welcome. Any question?
I think there will be any
Okay.
question from anyone.
Okay, the question could be translated by you. You could ask a
Okay.
Spanish question.
Si queréis hacer la pregunta en español y yo la puedo traducir, con mucho gusto. Si queréis hacer cualquier pregunta. Well, as they are thinking about the questions, I would like to ask you about the systemic class of thought forms, about which is we speak about systemic systems many times with about systemic thinking, and how would you say to anyone that still doesn't know very much about dialectics, how the systemic thought forms can help to achieve a new way of learning from reality, of viewing reality?
Thank you, Danielle. The term systemic for me is less important than the term transformational that is linked to it. And so for understanding that, I'm right now actually writing a little book about that called the Dialectical Thinking Primer, in which I teach people that dialectic has to do with 4 moments of dialectic: context, process, relationship, and transformation, which is what you refer to as systemic. And this is not immediately apparent that if we can look at the real world in terms of these 4 different perspectives, we can look at it in a static way where it doesn't seem to change and is always the same. We can look at it in terms of process or relationship, as we have discussed. But we can't really think about it in transformational or systemic terms unless we can already think about it in terms of context, process, and relationship. And the example I would give for that is if you take a beehive, and I happen to be a beekeeper, so then you can look at the beehive if you stand in front of it in terms of it being just a set of wooden boxes with frames inside. That would be the context view, the static view. Or you could think of the fact that over the year, the beehive starts out with maybe 1,000 bees, and in the summer there are 30,000 bees. So there is a huge process occurring, which is also part of the beehive. And then there are very intricate relationships between the bee queen and the bees, which define this system that we call a beehive. So if we want to understand the transformations or the systemic aspect of the beehive as it develops over the year, we need to pull all these moments of dialectic or thought forms together. And so then I think when we can do that, we really become very close to the real world, whereas otherwise I don't think we are very close to what really happens in the world, because the world is constantly changing. It's a dense net of relationships that holds things together, whether you look at an organization or the weather. And so we need to upgrade our thinking in the 21st century, I think, to a more dialectical view of things. And I gave the example of a beehive. So when I think, when I stand in front of a beehive, and all of this, what I talked about, is clear to me, then I think I'm really a transformational thinker. And so that takes time to develop, and it can't be learned from books very well, although books can be a help. But here at the Institute, we teach that kind of thinking, and coaches would be very welcome.
Okay, fantastic. Otto, there is a final question, because I see people telling me also that many of them want to know about what we are speaking about in Spanish. And Pablo, a colleague of mine here, will set a summary of what you have said in Spanish.
Okay.
As we are finishing. And the question is, final question from Rosa Torres is, can a young person who just finally has ended their studies can be a coach? Can he or she be a coach, a young person that just have finished by, for example, psychologics?
I don't see why not. A young coach, I would think you mean a coach in her 20s or so. Around the middle 20s, I would say adult thinking really begins. It begins already. Dialectical thinking really begins in late adolescence, so before 20, depending on the culture. And so a young person like that can certainly learn dialectical thinking. And in fact, I wish there were more young people doing that, because one reason why dialectical thinking is so difficult is that pensamento dialectico is just not taught, not even at universities. But we have developed courses for that, and I have had very young students who have learned it. So yes, the answer is emphatically yes. Everybody here in the audience has the resources for learning to think both socially, emotionally, and dialectically. There's no doubt about it. It is just a matter of practice.
Mm-hmm. Well, Otto, thank you very much from myself, from Ben Pensante, and from all the audience that are delighted listening to you, to all the things that you are telling us about, and all the things that are behind of it, the doors you're opening to us for learning more and knowing more about ourselves, about our thinking, and about all the knowledge you are giving us in your books. That I have well, I'm very happy to have translated it to Spanish, and to have very soon for people that will learn from it in Spanish also. So thank you very much.
You are most welcome. I would like to hear the Spanish summary, because it would help my Spanish.
Perfect.